So with that, let's get started. Before we dive into our main session, I would like to first introduce, again, Andrew Roberts with C-Store for a few intro slides, and then we'll get going with today's main event. Andrew?
Okay, thank you, Kim, and good afternoon, everybody. Can you believe it? We're already into September. The summer is wrapping up for us, and that also means that, unfortunately, our series of cybersecurity webinars, at least this series of cybersecurity webinars, is also wrapping up. Today is the 5th in our series of 5, so this is the last one. And you know, I think J. Peter would argue that we saved the best for last, and I think it's one of the most important ones that we did save for the last. So before we get into our webinar, let me just take a few minutes to tell you a little bit about C-Store for those of you who are new, and I do see a couple of new people here. I also see some people who have been here for the entire series, all 5 of them. Thank you for joining us for all of those. Anyway, C-Store is an award-winning provider. We help our clients solve their challenges with best-of-breed technologies. We take a vendor-agnostic, holistic approach to provide solutions that enable your business to move and scale. We have 3 main practice areas, and only 3 main practice areas, because we know that we can't be all things to all people. If we try and do everything, we'll do nothing well. But we are very good at data center, cybersecurity, and digital transformation. Exist to put people on a path to success, and that means our employees and our partners, but most importantly, our clients. We do put our clients first, and it is our mission to make sure that you are successful. We offer a variety of services to support a lot of the products that we sell, and you and your business. Security is at the core of those services. So that's enough about C-Store for right now. I know we're all here to listen to what our expert has to say. Now, for most of us, email is mission critical. We may not like to admit it, but it really is mission critical. And unfortunately, it's also mission critical for the cyber criminals as well. The vast majority of attacks that happen, and the exact amount's going to vary depending on who you ask, but I think everybody will agree that at least 90% of the attacks that happen start with an email. We live in a world where good enough isn't good enough anymore. Today, we're going to take a serious look at how we can strengthen our email perimeter to help protect our environment. So let's get to the reason that we're all here. This is not the first time we've had him as a guest speaker, and you're about to find out why we asked him back again. So with that, let me introduce J. Peter Bruzzese, Strategic Technical Consultant with Mimecast.
Greetings, and thank you. You took all my best lines. The good enough is not good enough, and some of those other points you made. I think we're kind of done. That was it. You took all my thunder. No, hopefully I have a few more things to add. It's great to be with you folks today. It truly is an amazing thing that we have the ability to talk like this in a world where many things are shut down. Travel is shut down in many situations, at least for me. I've spent a great deal of time traveling the world talking about cybersecurity, and I'm still happy that I'm able to do that, even if it's in this medium. Although one day I look forward to meeting all of you in person. So we're going to talk about protecting your email perimeter, and I don't want you to feel like this is a duplicitous title, because we all know that the perimeter, although it's probably considered the most valuable part of the entire discussion, right? If we could stop things right at the perimeter, if we could prevent anything from getting inside, that would be the ultimate goal, right? But it's not the only goal, because we do know that from time to time, no matter what solution we're using, something will get in, or it'll come in a different way. And so, as was mentioned, 90% of all email, it can be 90% of all attacks start with some kind of an email. Well, so then if that's the case, what about the other 10%? So we are going to talk about protecting the perimeter, but we have to talk about so many other things if we really want to make sure that this conversation is well-rounded. So I'll introduce myself for those of you folks who don't know who I am. My name is J. Peter Bruzzese. I'm an 8-time awarded Microsoft MVP. Now that was originally for Exchange Server, and then they moved me over to the Office 365 or Office Apps and Services or Servers bucket. And so basically this is an award that Microsoft gives to individuals who participate in the community. They're technical leaders in some way. Now in my case, I was awarded because I was a journalist for InfoWorld. I wrote the enterprise Windows column for them for about a decade. I created tons of content for Pluralsight. Maybe some of you have seen some of it. And as you can see from the rest of my bio, I'm a technical speaker. I speak for Microsoft and others, and really just love this. Honestly, just whether it's email or then expanding email out to email security, to me, it's a passion. So when you're passionate about something, when you love what you do, they say you don't work a day in your life. I don't know if that's exactly true, but I do love what I do. So I think that's going to come out as we talk today, that even though it's a serious subject, even though it's something that may cause quite a bit of stress and angst for you folks if you're trying to protect your perimeter, we also understand that, you know, there's a lot of really smart folks out there that are trying to come up with creative ways to accomplish this. And if we can discuss that, and if it opens your eyes to a couple of new pathways that perhaps you hadn't considered, then that's a good thing. At the same time, we need to talk about some of the rhetoric that is spread when it comes to even solution providers, whether it's Microsoft or others, who say their product can do one thing when maybe it doesn't quite do all that you imagine it would do. The idea that something is good enough, not when it comes to security. We don't want to just sit there. You know, someone says, well, how's your security? Well, it's good enough. You know, that's a bad answer. So we need to get to higher levels above and beyond good enough. So we're going to talk about a lot of fun things. Last but not least, just to mention, I'm a strategic technical consultant or a tech evangelist for Mimecast. And the reason that's the case is because years ago, when I started looking at folks moving to the cloud, and I said, okay, here I'm an on-premises Exchange admin and supporter and promoter. How do we move to the cloud in a safe way? It was actually the folks at Microsoft who said, you know, you might want to look at some of the third-party vendors out there that provide additional enhanced support for things like security and archiving and continuity and such with a move to the cloud. And that's how I became associated with Mimecast. There was an introduction made with Microsoft, and I was speaking at one of their conferences, and Mimecast happened to be out on the floor, on the expo floor. So it's been a long-term relationship in that regard. So let's talk about this a little bit. Let's set the premise really clear. There's no silver bullet. I know there are tons of, marketing, sales and marketing initiatives by these companies that provide some level of perimeter support and even internal support for email. And they would promise you the world in terms of perfection. And they would claim that there's a silver bullet. What I like about companies that I work with is that they openly say there's no silver bullet. It's not like there's any one thing you can do that now is going to stop all harmful email from coming through and from getting to a user. And it's impossible to say that. However, by combining solutions together, and so you right away you'll say, okay, we get it. He's a defense in depth kind of person. It's like, yes, that's true. I am still not one of those people who embrace the one single vendor to rule them all kind of thing. I believe that we need multiple vendors. We may not need as many as we needed in the past. You know, when you think about Exchange Server on premises in the past, we always surrounded our Exchange Server environment with this ecosystem suite of solutions, didn't we? I can imagine some of you may not remember the old days, with 10 years ago, but some of you may be able to come back that far with me. And you remember with email, we had to have something that monitored Exchange Server because the built-in monitoring wasn't all that great. Something to back up and restore Exchange Server because you really wouldn't use Windows backup, Windows Server backup for that. Something to archive it because Microsoft never had an archive solution for it. Something to secure it because there was no built-in security for Exchange, right? So you always had some kind of let's say either maybe an appliance or a software-based solution, or even a cloud-based solution when they became available. So we're used to that with Exchange on premises. It's no lie to say that now a great majority of those on-premises environments has moved to M365. So does the story change? Yes, it does to a degree. But still, that doesn't mean that we don't need, a village surrounding our Exchange environment. We may not need as many solutions, but we still need a few in order to provide additional defense and depth support. So there's no silver bullet. We have to look at ways that we can mitigate the threats coming in. As you can see, there's a couple of headlines, recent headlines that may catch your attention: the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack and the ransomware attack on JBS. These are things that are hitting industries, and we're going to see more of this. It used to be it was every fourth or fifth day, then it was every third day. Now it's every day, every hour. There's something new happening in the world of cyber threats and cyber attacks. So we realize that we might be vulnerable. So what do we do? Well, for starters, we have to consider where the threats are coming from and then see if there's a way for us to mitigate those threats, right? And we have to figure out where we put the majority of our effort in that regard. So you're aware that there's all of these different problems that are happening in the world today, and they ultimately find the entry points where they're going to be the most effective. You know, you think about a cyber criminal, and they don't sit there and go, you know, I really want to do something really hard today. I want it to be unique, something that no one's ever done, and I want to possibly fail and make no money at it, right? That's not the way they think. They think more along the lines of, I want to reuse, you know, regurgitated code that someone else has already written. I want this to be easy, low-hanging fruit. I want to make money off of this. And ultimately, I need to attack something that is going to be easy to get through, is going to have a large attack surface, you know, and is going to give me the greatest bang for my buck here. In our world, that would be either Exchange on premises, which we saw this Hafnium attack, which really shocked me, to have an attack that would take out servers, you know, on-premises servers, that we had never seen anything like this before. So that was new. But then, of course, the more common attacks are the ones that affect the M365 world. So we see that, you know, on a daily basis, folks are trying to get through the Microsoft barrier. Because they know that if they can get through one, it's a monoculture scenario. If you can get through one, you can get through all, right? Think about your Windows systems. If everyone's using Windows and there's a 0-day vulnerability, then all you have to do to get to hundreds of millions of Windows systems to get through them is to find that vulnerability and then exploit it. What makes your Windows different from the person next to you or the organization next to you? Well, typically what you do is you look at your Windows and you say, you know what, I need to put some type of defense on my Windows system. Now, Microsoft has worked really hard in the last few years to bolster their endpoint protection with Windows Defender. But still, many organizations, again, look to a third party and they say, I'm going to put on something like Sophos or Cylance or SentinelOne or Malwarebytes or whatever it is. And that's okay, because it gives you that little bit of difference, that little bit of variety between you and the person next to you. And that's what prevents a monoculture when it comes to our Windows devices. But here's the funny thing. That's not where the biggest threats are coming from. So we typically spend a lot of time thinking about endpoint protection, and we should. But if 90+% of all attacks start with some form of a phish, as you can see here on the slide, and according to the Wall Street Journal, it's 97% of all cyber attacks. I think that's a bit high. I think that that's a little bit higher than I would want to even promote. But I saw that in the Wall Street Journal, reputable, you know, location, and ultimately I felt like it was worth throwing it out there. I personally like to say 90+%. I think that that's safe. I think everyone would agree, okay, that's where we are. So then if that's the case, then when you have any amount of budget that you want to allocate towards this defense in depth mentality, it might warrant best use on the email side. That's where we're seeing these ransomware attacks come through. They're getting through whatever technology we have on the front end, getting into the user's inbox, and then ultimately we're leaving it up to them to hopefully have some solid training that allows them to see the attack for what it is. Unfortunately, that's near impossible sometimes. Some of these things, to the naked eye, they are so well done, so perfect, that it would be impossible for the user to be able to detect that it's a lie. So we need to have both working, the technology on the front end, on the perimeter, and then of course the user on the internal side protecting themselves. That's why we're going to talk about this from a holistic perspective, not just when we think holistically, we think about not just fixing the injury or the illness, but treating the entire patient, right? Your whole network is the patient. So when we look at security built in, right? Well, we're going to focus on M365 because again, the majority of folks have moved there by this point. We're going to look at built-in versus bolt-on. The built-in features are the features that are in Exchange Online protection, or now there's also the added piece that Microsoft provides. It was called Advanced Threat Protection, now called Defender for 365. And we're going to compare that to third-party solutions and what additional features might come from a defense in-depth approach, especially at the perimeter. We'll talk about features, we'll talk about efficacy. Both are important because when you're looking at a checklist of features, you might see two solutions or Microsoft versus a third-party solution, and they might all check the boxes you're looking for. But efficacy is a totally different story. Someone says, I have the ability to do this, but how well can they do it? And can they actually back that up with some kind of provided data that would allow us to then see how much more so their solution is better than the next one? That's important. The primary focus points, though, for all of us would be around things like attachment protection, because that's where you're going to see your ransomware and your malware. URL scanning, destination scanning, real-time protection. That's where you're going to see your spear phishing and so on. The links that lead off to these, websites that are spun up. It seems like every second there's a new one. Impersonation protection, that used to be I would say your Nigerian prince stories, but those are the late 90s, early 2000s. Now it's really all sorts of different impersonation, and mainly impersonation of people within the company, domain spoofing and so forth. Internal email protection is key, and then domain spoofing, we talk about things like SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, which honestly, if you have not ventured into that world of DMARC, you really want to pay attention to that portion when we talk about it. And something else that's not on this list is MTA, STS. It's just another form of security. It's pretty new, but transport layer security to help you to see another way that you can protect yourself from man-in-the-middle attacks. Some of these things are actually either low cost or free. And so it's important to look for those opportunities where it's not even going to cost you much out of your budget. It just will take some time to research and implement. So we'll get to all of this, but it's some exciting stuff we're going to talk about. Now, I like to show this cartoon. It's kind of a funny story. I'll tell you the story. So I was on a stage in South Africa. It was January of 2019. I was supposed to go back this past January, but of course that's not going to happen, and who knows when I'll get back there. But I was in front of this audience and about 300 people, and it was going really well. And somebody raised their hand in the middle of all this, and they're the only person with their hand up. And I said, yes, can I help you? And they said, I'm just curious. They said, J. Peter, you talk about all of these different security features and such, but how can you explain to me why I would, if I have Microsoft and I already have their security, why would I ever want a defense in depth approach? Why would I ever want to bolt another thing on? What can you explain that? And I was like, okay, good question. Now I had noticed in South Africa, they had different types of fences there from ones I'm used to. We're maybe used to chain link fences or picket fences and such, but there they had these almost wall-like fences, and on the top they had embedded right in the concrete of the wall glass, and they were very high, 8 foot, 9 foot wall. So I asked the person, I said, would you say that all fences are equal? And he said, well, no. And I said, right. I said, so that's kind of, if I had to explain it this way, it's kind of like if I told you I was going to build a fence around your house, and you showed up and there was a 2 foot picket fence around your house. Would that make you feel secure? He says, no. I said, but it's a fence. It's a fence around your house. I said, but again, just because it's a fence doesn't mean all fences are equal. And that made me think, and I brought that back, and I reached out to my cartoonist in the UK. As you folks probably do, when you have an idea, you probably call your cartoonist in the UK and say, hey, I need you to draw something up for me. And that's how this image kind of came about. The idea here is that the first house on the left is Exchange Online Protection. Microsoft provides this for free. It's built into M365. It's certainly much more than what we ever got with Exchange on Premises. In the later renditions of Exchange on Premises, there was an antivirus piece that is enabled. You can disable it during the install. It didn't do much. There are some, little pieces that you can do. There's some anti-spam agents that you can install on the edge transport side, or even on the, if you don't have an edge transport server, you can use it within your Exchange environment too, within the perimeter. But ultimately, it wasn't very robust, right? So now we have Exchange Online Protection, which is definitely better. And it's a cloud-based solution. But to me, it's still, I liken it to a 2 foot picket fence, because it'll keep the critters out, right? Anti-spam, anti-malware, but it doesn't do much beyond that. It won't protect you from a ransomware attack, any type of attachment protection. It's not built in. And Microsoft doesn't claim that it is. So they're not being, tricky here. They don't claim that EOP, a free solution for anti-spam and anti-malware, is going to protect you from some of these heavier threats. Okay. Well, you say, well, what about the middle one? Well, the middle one represents more of what Advanced Threat Protection or Defender for 365 provides. It's a 4 or 5 foot fence, shadow box fence, that will provide more protection, certainly, than EOP. And the way it does this is it has some attachment protection. We'll talk about that in a moment. It does have some additional URL destination scanning, some real-time reaching out to the URL. And that's where you start getting into the nuances and start getting into features and efficacy in order to determine, is this fence strong enough? Is it good enough? Right? And is that where you want to sit? Good enough? Or would you like something a little better? And that's where a lot of third-party solutions kind of more represent that third fence. That's where we're talking about a 10-foot tall iron fence with barbed wire and sentinels and cameras, and there's guard dogs on the other side and so forth. And that will protect from not just opportunistic attacks, but also from targeted attacks. Those attacks where someone is purposely trying to go after your environment, right? Now, it's a great cartoon. It makes the point, right? I love it. But there's no real data to this image, is there? I'm telling you that this is what these three fences represent, but where's the data? Right? Without data, then it's just all anecdotal, right? And we don't want that. So let's look at some data. I could talk about all of the different features we mentioned earlier, whether it's attachment protection or URL destination scanning or internal email protection or impersonation attacks, and we could go one feature at a time through all of them. But I doubt that it would be very enjoyable. And it probably would take a whole lot more than the hour we have allocated here. So let's not do that. Let's instead focus on one. And I think if we make the point with one, it'll kind of transition over to the others. And I'll make a few additional points about the others. So attachment protection. When you think about ransomware attacks and you have an email that comes in with an attachment and you say to yourself, okay, this may get into my user's inbox if I don't have some protection to scan it. And would training enough be good enough to stop a ransomware attack? Most likely not. So I have to have some technology to protect myself. So now you say, well, I've got Exchange Online Protection. Well, let's look at Exchange Online Protection. This is what Microsoft says it does for attachments. Nothing, right? You can see down the line, it's all red. Now, is that to say that an email with an attachment will never get caught by EOP in the sense that if it has something, if it's supposed to be anti-malware and stuff, no, of course, it will catch things that are well known, that are already in the, that there's already a signature for, and there are some heuristics that are built in too. But there is no preemptive sandbox. Typically, when it comes to attachments of this sort, especially new types of ransomware attacks and such, you have to be able to sandbox it, detonate it, and see if there's something inside of this thing, right? If it's a weaponized attachment, if it can be detonated, then it stops it and it won't let it pass forward. Exchange Online Protection doesn't provide any of these things. It doesn't provide a sandbox. It doesn't provide anything additional. It doesn't rip and replace the email with something else, whether it's a PDF, or provide a safe link preview. It doesn't do any of that. It's not built for that. Okay, so we're clear on EOP. And if we looked at all of the other things that EOP does or doesn't do, I think we'd come up pretty disappointed in terms of looking at all, but that's okay. Again, Microsoft doesn't promise that it's going to do more than the basic anti-spam and anti-malware, and it's free. So let's not beat it up too much, right? But Advanced Threat Protection or Defender for 365, this is something you actually pay for. You either buy it a la carte or you pay for it as part of a plan where you have it, let's see, as part of an E5 plan, which is a very expensive plan. Sometimes folks will come to me and say, Jay Peter, I'm thinking about enhancing my security. I know if I go with E5, I get all the extra security features in there. What do you think? And I'll ask them, well, that's fine, but do you have another reason for going to E5? Because if you don't, then I think it's better to sit back at E3 or even E1 if you don't need E3 and look at why you're bolting on this particular additional security as opposed to taking that same budget and allocating it towards something else. The jump between E3 and E5 is so great that you could really pick up like the BMW of security to bolt onto your environment. So hopefully you've got a better reason than just moving to E5 over security. And typically they'll come back and say, well, no, I want to move to E5 because I have all of the the conferencing and the Teams calling and the additional telephony aspects of the move to E5 that have to come into play. That makes sense. But just doing E5 for the sake of security, that's just a waste of money in that regard. So we look at it and we say, okay, so forget about, even folks, if you say, well, I'm already on E5, so I guess I have all the security I need. Well, let's look at what Defender for 365 does provide. When it comes to attachments, is there a preemptive sandbox? The answer is yes. Microsoft uses an Azure VM-based, software-based sandboxing solution. They built it in-house, and ultimately emails come through. They open this attachment to see if it's going to detonate, and if it is a problem, they won't pass it forward. Does it work? Yes, of course it works. However, that's it. that's the end of that story. There are a couple of additional things that it does. For example, it was the case, there was at some point in time, a few years back, where it was really slow. And so there was a big red mark under high-speed sandbox processing. And so now we see it's yellow. That means that it's changed and it's evolved and it's faster now. We'll see that yellow turn to green actually in the time ahead. But that is a change. They're enhancing it. They're making it better. Some of the other things, though, we don't see. Innovative transcription with on-demand sandbox, potentially harmful attachments replaced with transcribed safe versions. So that's an interesting solution. So when you look at third party, there's a green there. Some third party solutions, like Mimecast, for example, they will take the document, let's say it's a Word document, and they'll convert it to a PDF. Now, what's the value in that? So an email that comes in with a weaponized attachment, if it's a Word document and it gets converted to PDF and given to the end user, it is 100% clear of any malware, ransomware. Nothing can survive the conversion process. If it came in as a PDF, they'll convert it to HTML and then back to PDF. And basically, again, nothing survives. So it's 100% effective against ransomware and malware. You might say, well, that's fantastic. I need that. But here's the thing. Sometimes you say, well, but I still need at times the original document. I mean, I need to edit that Word document. Well, so that's where you can click a button and it will sandbox the original document, make sure that it's, it doesn't have any issues, and then pass it forward. So that's good. You need to look for that. Look for solutions that have innovative options. Here's another one. So a static file version of the static file analysis version. So I mentioned the sandboxing solution. That's more of a dynamic solution. Email comes in, it checks it, passes it forward if it's safe. But what about a solution that can look right into the document itself, right into the soul of it, look at the bits and the bytes of it, and look for executable code? So that's where there are third-party solutions, Mimecast is one of them, where they use a static file analysis solution. And basically, they look at the zeros and ones for any executable code. This sets off all sorts of red flags. And the great thing about it is it doesn't require the latency time of sandboxing it, which even though it's very fast these days, whether it's Microsoft or a third party, they're moving at pretty decent speeds, but still that latency is removed from the equation because it's static. So it can see if there's a red flag. So you notice, some of the innovation when it comes to third parties. Do they use sandboxing solutions? Yes. Do they also have some type of a conversion in order to have a replaced safe version? Sometimes, yes. And that's what you should be looking for. Static file analysis. Yes, that's an important thing to look for. And this is where it's more than just the traditional standard sandbox, but now you're moving into other more innovative solutions. In a world where ransomware attacks are very common, right, we need to have a more innovative world, right? We need to be able to see these problems from different angles. Now, I mentioned some of the other things, whether it's impersonation attacks or some of these other types. That's where you need to look at solutions that can provide protection from, let's say, a homoglyph domain. So, with URL destination scanning, you get these URLs. Sometimes these URLs are actually, they're homoglyphs or Punycode. If you go and you search for a homoglyph generator, you'll see what I mean. But you can pretty much take any domain name and you can look for a different character set. You can even register that domain using a different character set. And ultimately now you can have genuine domains that people think are real and the links look real, but really they're pointing off to inappropriate sites. And to sites that might then be, might have malicious code or some type of password grabbing code, things of that sort. So we need to have a solution that can scan for these types of attacks, whether it's, first of all, scanning to see if they're using homoglyphs and Punycode, and then also destination scanning. So Microsoft provides real-time destination scanning. What they do is when you go to click the link, they will check that page to see if there's any malicious code running. But see, the bad guys have gotten really used to that. So now they know that that page is going to be scanned. So you know what they do? They just put links off of that page and then they go a layer deeper or deeper than that. And basically they're taking the chance that you're going to click into their world and eventually, you'll be on a page that has malicious code. That's smart on their part. But see, that's where you need to have a solution that doesn't just start with the surface and ends there. No, but goes deeper. It follows those links so that it stays with you and really checks to make sure that you're safe. So the main point here is that we need to look at features and efficacy, and we need to see if the solutions we're using are more than good enough. Do they check a box, or do they do a really great job at protecting our organization? That's the key. Now, along with that, sometimes it's good to look at what third-party evaluations have said about a particular product. And that's where, here, this is one from out of the UK, SE Labs. Now, I post the actual report there. It's easy to find. You can just do an SE Labs email security services protection awards and so forth. I'm going to be honest with you. This is 26 or 27 pages, and I wouldn't say it's the most riveting thing to read in the world, but it is so worth reading. It really is, because it's a report that basically tells you how they rated these different solutions. You see there's a variety of different products, third-party solutions, Kaspersky, Mimecast, Fortinet, and a bunch of others, and Microsoft is included. Now, there might be solutions in there that aren't even on the list, and you might say, oh, where's that solution? Honestly, they felt that they rated so low that they didn't even include them. And so these are the main ones that they were really happy with when they searched, and you can see from the report that the number of things that they put these solutions through in order to come up with a legitimate rating system. And you see the numbers that are there and how they, kind of added it all up. But by reading the report, you get a much better picture. But that's where, again, we talk about features, we talk about efficacy, we might talk about word of mouth, talking to some of your peers about, hey, what are you using to protect your environment? Seeing what they say, seeing what is working for them. And then also looking at third-party, evaluations, whether it's SE Labs or some of the others. There's Gartner, there's Forrester, and there's others. The only negative I have on some of these is you've got to be careful when you're reading other people's reports and evaluations. Some of them are pay to play. So that's where the vendor is the one sponsoring the report. And so therefore, you wonder, is this valid? That's what I like about this SE Labs one, because again, there's a lot of different vendors involved. And obviously the main focus is, if you read the report, what they were looking for, the actual data to support their evaluation, not just, hey, I like this vendor, so I'll give them a high score. No, you can see there's actual numbers and ratings there. So these are just some of the things that we need to look at from a security perspective. Now, we've spent a lot of time talking about this, and that's where, holistic security has to include looking at things from a multidimensional perspective, right? It's a multidimensional problem, so we need a multidimensional solution. And this is where we talk about the perimeter, and of course that is our main thing. Keeping things out of our environment would be, the ultimate. But that's zone one. Zone two is inside your organization. What happens when an email does get through? Are your people trained? Are your servers fortified? Things, again, we talk about things that are free. Microsoft creates patches. We had that Hafnium attack, and people went crazy now trying to update all of their servers. I worked with an organization that had, roughly 70 servers that they had to patch and bring up to speed. There were 4 different patches that had to be installed. Ultimately, they are so on the ball, they got it done in 24 hours, but a lot of other organizations didn't, and some actually were hit by the attack itself. So we need to be making sure that we are on top of server updates. We need to be prepared for security updates, and even automate that if we can, get that working in a way that can be beneficial for us. So that's one thing. But the other thing is we need to make sure our users are prepared for whether it's in that case, that was a server-side attack. But if it's an email type attack, whether it's one of these impersonation attacks or ransomware attacks, how well does our internal staff perform? Well, how do you know? There are solutions that you can look at. Microsoft has their attack simulator. There are other organizations that have different types of simulators, and they will do a fake phishing test or multiple tests to help you to see where your weak links are in your organization. Combine that or pair it up with really good security awareness training. And even if you can't, there's nobody, again, no silver bullet. We can't say we're going to take all of your users and make them perfect security, gurus and advisors and such, but we can move the needle a little bit, can't we? It's important to do that, because even just a little bit of a reduction in the types of attacks that might get through and then get clicked on is a valuable thing when you think about the cost in so many ways, the reputational damage and so forth, the cost monetarily, all of these things, or the cost to your clients if, let's say, if their data were to get outside. Anything you can do to mitigate that is worthwhile. So this is where zone 2 is inside your organization. Zone 3 goes beyond your perimeter. You know, we talked a little bit earlier about SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. Honestly, a few years back, I had no idea what these terms meant. It just wasn't my field. So, you know, I had some semblance of an idea of what SPF did, how it gave DNS the ability to you know, see all of the different organizations you might work with, like SendGrid or some of these other email senders that send on your behalf, and then validate you to the outside world. So that if you're using SendGrid or some other solution to send emails out on your behalf, then it can validate that because your DNS says, yes, all of these are safe. That's a good thing, right? But DKIM is often not implemented. And yet in the M365 world, it is so easy and free. Microsoft, if you just do a search for DKIM in M365, Microsoft provides you the step-by-step instructions. I swear it took hours for me to read up on what DKIM is, right? Still never quite mastered, you know, the entire concept because it's quite a bit in terms of encryption and what's happening and such, you know, but ultimately it took 10 minutes to implement, right? Microsoft makes this very easy. And again, no cost. You just have to follow their directions. And most of it is just copying what they tell you to do. So you want to implement that. But SPF and DKIM, on their own, they're great, but they don't necessarily provide all that you need. See, it's DMARC. DMARC, you know, and again, that's another thing you can spend, you know, quite a bit of time spiraling and reading. But what DMARC basically does is it takes SPF and DKIM and it allows you to see and triangulate the two to determine if email is coming from the proper place. So it's great to prevent from domain spoofing. And it's great to prevent, it's mainly for your organization, to make sure that your partners are not having your organization used in an attack against them. And it'll let other servers know, hey, if this email doesn't have SPF or DKIM in place and it's not set up right, well, then you shouldn't accept this email. So I have implemented this over the last year or so for several different organizations, and it is amazing. It is amazing how often email is being spoofed or tried to be spoofed around the world from different countries and such. Thousands of emails that are being sent out of countries, whether it's China or some of these other places. I've seen how they're being stopped now because we have DMARC implemented. So it is really worth that. But here's the thing. You can implement DMARC without having any visualization of what's actually happening, no response, no analyzer, right? And so you can do that, but what's the value there? It's nice to be able to see it. And that's where Microsoft doesn't provide a DMARC analyzer. They do provide, however, a list of third parties that will help you to analyze your data. So that's where, again, looking for an organization that sees the holistic side to this, whether it's zone 1, 2, or 3, and then can provide for all of them, that can be really beneficial for you, the all-in-one solution. And then, of course, you know, sometimes you want to be able to extend and play nice with other solutions, and that's where it's good to have solutions that work well together. You know, whether it's some of these other security solutions, Palo Alto or Splunk, you know, things of that sort, where they all work together. So that's why, and this is one of the few slides where I actually mentioned Mimecast directly. That's why when you look at a company like Mimecast, and there are others out there that try to look at things from a holistic perspective, we look at beyond the perimeter, right? We look at the perimeter, we look at inside the perimeter, right? And we look at ways to plug all of the gaps and try to do it with an all-in-one solution, but also one that can play nice with other solutions that are out there. You know, so this is where, you know, it's really important for us to understand all of the threats that are out there and try to, instead of saying, hey, I've got a silver bullet that's going to fix all of this. No, you need to take the time to plug those gaps with solutions that work, just like we did in years past. It's just, it's a new game. Now, we're moving towards, you know, a time where we want to start answering some questions. I just wanted to point out a couple of other things. One is with regard to continuity. So for those of you who do use M365, you may notice that from time to time it goes down. You may even notice, you know, that when it goes down, it may go down in whole or in parts or in pieces. In other words, the entire service might be down if it's one of those Azure AD or Azure DNS issues. Or you might have an issue where it's just a part. Teams is down, but email is working. Or it could be a piece, like multi-factor authentication is down. And if you're using MFA, that becomes a problem for you, which is why I always recommend that you use MFA, but that you make sure you have the ability to turn it off. So a break the glass account is always essential for MFA if your company policy will allow you to do that. But this way you can go in and turn it off, you know, in the event there's an issue. Anyway, so here's the thing. A lot of times folks think that losing your ability to send email, especially with email being so mission critical, that it is the worst thing in the world, and that this is, really going to affect workflow and things of that sort. Well, that's true, but that's not the worst part. See, I like to point out that the worst part of M365 going down is that you lose your protective bubble. And what I mean by that is people will continue working. See, depending on the industry, there are some people who stop working, right? But there are some people who are in the middle of something. And if they lose email, they don't stop working. They decide, I'm going to continue working, right? And so in that regard, we need to focus on those folks, the shadow IT folks, because they will find a way they'll move over to Gmail, let's say, to send email. Now, in doing so, they're still using your company laptop or desktop, but now they're not under your protective email umbrella. And in that regard, then they're not protected. And if you're, let's say, an industry that requires compliance discovery, now they're not providing e-discovery. So they're using Gmail, and all that email is kind of out in the wild. However, they're receiving email perhaps there, which can then be pulled in and cause a problem in your environment. So this is a problem. So how do we fix this particular problem? When we're talking about security and the perimeter and such, this is where there are some creative solutions out there that I think do a really good job of finding a way to solve this problem. One example here is what Mimecast does is it has a heartbeat between the customer and Microsoft. In the event there's an outage, that heartbeat is broken. And then the administrator gets a text alert saying, well, so there's a problem with your email. Would you like to switch tracks? It's sort of a panic button. You push the button and it switches tracks. And the users then can continue to send and receive emails if nothing had happened, because instead of sending it through Microsoft, now they're sending it through another solution, through, in this case, Mimecast. The value here is that if that third-party solution is also your security and your archive solution, well, now your people don't need to switch to a shadow IT solution. They are continuing to work, which is good. And that's, of course, you might say, well, that's the most important thing. But no, that's not the most important thing. Again, the most important thing is that they be able to work in a secure and compliant environment. So just having them believe me, they can work. They don't need they've learned a lot over the years. They don't need you to keep working. They'll use Gmail, they'll use Dropbox, they'll use other things to get their job done. And that shadow IT is going to hurt you. So what you really need to do is make sure that when there is an outage, which does happen from time to time with all cloud vendors, including Microsoft, when that outage occurs, that they have an alternative way to keep working in a safe and compliant manner. And that's where, again, looking for innovative bolt-on solutions that enhance what Microsoft provides. Microsoft has always done an amazing job of providing great solutions, but this allows you to enhance it. And that is the key to looking for things that will help with email security. And in this case, this is a security issue as well, because they might be using shadow IT solutions, which put your company at risk. Might also put your company at risk with regard to compliance and discovery. For the sake of time and being able to answer some questions, I'll just mention that on the e-discovery side to M365, there are also some issues. There's some issues with regard to interactivity for end users. It's not an interactive archive the way a modern day archive might have it. The mailbox retains all of the email, which bloats that mailbox. It makes it so that there are performance issues in Outlook and such. There's some issues with regard to enterprise-grade e-discovery, and there's also been multiple, there have been multiple flaw scandals. A couple that I'll point out here. One was back just in, it's kind of funny, it was right before the pandemic. I was in London speaking at the Ignite conference, Microsoft Ignite, and I ran into Tony Redman, who wrote this article about an Outlook flaw that compromised Microsoft's Exchange Online native data protection. I actually thought the flaw compromised the compliance and e-discovery side to things, because the way it worked is if you were using Outlook, you could go in and delete an attachment right out of the archive, right? Which should be impossible. How do you claim immutability if somebody can actually delete from the archive? It was just a flaw that they found, and they have found others over time. But they fixed this one within about 2 weeks. But who knows for how long, it was open to the public. I think, for quite some time. So this is where looking for enterprise-grade solutions to bolt on is also important. Solutions that aren't just, created overnight, but solutions that have been around for quite some time to provide things like archiving and so forth and security. Now, I'll just conclude it and then move it over. We'll turn it back over to Kim in a second here, but there may not be a silver bullet. right? And I know that might be disheartening for some, but I think any of us who have been around for a while, we knew that already. So to have holistic thinking, right, to really look at the entire network and think about how we're going to protect it, not just the perimeter, but all of the different zones, right, we need to look at where the gaps are in the solutions we're using. And if we're using M365 or on-premises Exchange still, there are gaps, and that's okay, right? There have always been gaps. It's not a slight against Microsoft to admit that they're there. They know it. So then how do we fill these gaps? How do we enhance our solution to give us a better shot at protecting us in a world where we're constantly being bombarded, right? Well, the areas, again, that are worth considering, number one is security, right? Look at solutions that can enhance your security. The number two is compliance, right? And number three is continuity, right? So an all-in-one solution that hits all of the gaps and does it at a high level across the board, that's the key. Because gone are the days where you want to fill all of those buckets with a different vendor, right? So you look for reducing the number of vendors you're using, but still, I recommend a defense in depth approach. It's the only way to ensure that you have all of your bases covered, that you don't just allow a single vendor to determine the strength of your security for your environment, no matter who that vendor is, okay? So that's the conclusion of the discussion. I'm looking forward to seeing what questions you might have come up with, along the way here. Kim, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jay Peter. Great insight. At this time, we will open it up for questions. You can post them to the questions pane, and we do have a few coming in, so we'll dive right in. First question, where do you see Microsoft making strides in their security offerings?
So I mentioned earlier that they're making some great strides with regard to things like their Defender for Endpoint. Years ago, I would ask an audience, I would say, how many of you are using Windows Defender? I remember this one audience that had about 100 people, and only a handful raised their hand. And yet now, I think we would see that maybe even half of the audience would raise their hand, because we're seeing Microsoft making strides in their endpoint protection, their Windows Defender endpoint. That's one thing. The other thing is their attack simulator. I saw when they originally released Attack Simulator, which is an E5 security piece, and ultimately I thought this is like so horrific. It's so minimalist compared to what's out there in the world. Who would ever use this thing? And I recently, just last week, had a chance to see some of the new updates to it, and they've really come a long way with their Attack Simulator, where it provides the ability to choose a variety of different campaign types for fake phishing simulation emails, and then tie it back to training on the back end. Even third-party training that you might have on your own, you can tie it back to that. I think they're coming a long way with some of these features, and I'm excited to see what else they'll develop as we move forward.
Awesome, thank you. We're going to squeeze in a couple more questions here. It looks like, okay, next question. Beyond SPF, DKIM, DMARC, are there other new security methods at the perimeter that we should be investigating? Anything else out there?
So, actually, yes. I mentioned the MTA STS thing. I recently worked on a project where I actually implemented this, and it's not all that difficult to implement. It takes, again, a lot of reading, trying to figure out what are we looking for here. But ultimately, it's a way for, and you can find this if you just do some research on it. There are a lot of great articles on it. It's a way for them to check back, for email servers to check back to see if your emails are legitimate. And it prevents those man-in-the-middle attacks where someone might interrupt the flow of your email and distort things on the back end. Because what it does is there's a DNS entries that point off to a file that you put on a web server that basically will validate that the email is coming from the right location. So these are just really funky ways that people are trying to come up with it's almost like creating more of that quorum feeling where there's validation, but it's happening automatically on the back end, and it's utilizing DNS quite a bit in order to accomplish it. So yeah, there are some really creative new ways, and again, it's another thing that for the most part is free to implement, but it will help with protecting those from those types of attacks coming through.
That's awesome, thank you. Last question. Oh, this is a good one. Do you believe awareness training has any real impact? That's maybe a deep question, but good luck.
Yeah, well, I've seen a lot of different types of training. One of the things that you might have seen in the opening slide is that I actually have a company called Clip Training, which provides a variety of different types of training. So I've seen training, awareness training especially, that is just death by PowerPoint, very boring, very bland. And then I've seen some really high quality training too, stuff that really engages you and pulls you in. Mimecast has training that it's sort of like a sitcom scenario, so you kind of know the characters a bit, and it's super funny. And I think that that's the key, is that any kind of training, whether it's security or any kind of training, if it's engaging, if the end user decides that this is more entertainment than education, in some cases, that really helps. And I think security is a big one in this regard, helping them lower their walls so they don't feel like they're being preached at, and instead make it funny so that they go, yikes, I've done that. I've made that mistake. I've given out my password, or I've clicked that link, and making it so that they won't do it again. So I think it's super important to have this kind of training, different types of it too, not just, I mean, it's one thing to have definitions, but I think you need lectures. I think you need, things that'll show practical application, show them the emails that they might get, show them where it's sort of like a game where you show them where the hole is in the story so that they go, oh, I see it now. Anything you can do to get your users to be more of that human firewall, right? That's what you want. You want them to be a human firewall, and training is the only way to get there. So I think it's very important.
Awesome, thank you. That actually does conclude our Q&A portion. Thank you so much, J. Peter. Awesome information. Before we let everyone go for today, I did want to quickly pass it back to Andrew just for some closing comments. And Andrew, maybe you can comment on how people can follow up if they're interested in learning more and getting some help with their plans around email security. Andrew?
Okay, sure. And thanks, Kim. And again, thank you everybody for joining us here today. J. Peter, I really appreciate your talk today. I always enjoy what you have to say. So I do appreciate listening. Email security is one of my favorite topics because I know it is such a big hole for a lot of organizations, and it's a really important thing to focus on. And J. Peter, awareness training is also another big one for me too. If you'd like more information about this, reach out to your C-Store account manager. You can reach out to me if you'd like. It's andrew.roberts@cstore.com. It's pretty easy to do. Reach out. We'll be happy to have a conversation with you and follow up with you later. So this is the end of our fifth and last webinar for this series. So thank you all for joining us. We'll let you know when we're going to do another series, and I suspect we're going to at some point in the not too distant future. So with that, thank you everybody and have a great day.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope to see you on another C-Store event very soon. Have an awesome day.